Humanity has mapped almost every corner of this planet. We've sent crude submarines nearly 7 miles straight down into the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in any ocean on Earth, roughly 36,000 feet below the surface of the waves. We've drilled the Kola superdeep borehole in Russia to more than 40,000 feet, the deepest artificial hole ever made by human hands, a project so extreme, so far beyond what our machines were built to endure, that the Soviets eventually gave up and abandoned it. And in all of recorded human history, no matter how deep we have gone, no matter how far down we've reached, we have always, eventually, hit the bottom. But there is one hole that has never once given up its bottom. A single, unremarkable-looking pit in a quiet field in rural Washington state, ringed with old hand-laid brick, sitting in the middle of nowhere. According to the man who owned that land, more than 80,000 feet of fishing line, over 15 miles of it, was fed slowly down into this hole, foot by foot, hour after hour, and it never once touched anything solid. No floor, no water, no echo, no end. And that was before anyone thought to point a camera into it. Years after the first stories spread, a group of men attached a high-powered light and a camera to a heavy steel weight, spooled it onto a winch, and began to lower it into the blackness of that pit, while they watched a monitor at the surface. What they claim came back up, that cable in its final seconds. What they say rose up out of the dark and stared into the lens before the feed went dead is the reason this hole has terrified nearly everyone who has ever heard the full story. It is the reason grown men refuse to ever go back. And it may be the reason the land itself, according to some, was eventually fenced off, seized, and sealed away from the public forever. But long before that camera ever went down, this hole had already earned a reputation that most people simply refused to believe. A neighbor's dead dog was allegedly thrown into it and then seen days later, alive, walking through the woods. A living sheep was lowered into the pit and pulled back up, cooked from the inside out, with something impossible sealed alive inside its body. And an ordinary bucket of ice, sent down into that darkness, came back transformed into a substance that no scientist has ever been able to identify. For several days, I went through every recording, every radio transcript, every eyewitness account, and every scrap of testimony I could find about this place. And I'll be honest with you, the way I always try to be, I came away with far more questions than answers. This is, without exaggeration, the single most disturbing hole ever reported on planet Earth. This is the mystery of Mel's Hole. The whole thing began on the night of the 21st of February 1997. That evening, a man calling himself Mel Waters phoned into Coast to Coast AM at the time, the most popular late-night paranormal radio program in all of America, hosted by the legendary broadcaster Art Bell. Millions of people were listening in the dark that night, the way they did every night, and none of them had any idea that the next few hours would spawn one of the most enduring mysteries in modern American folklore. Mel's story was simple, at least at first. He owned a stretch of property about 9 miles due west of the town of Ellensburg, Washington, out on a lonely feature called Manastash Ridge. And on his land, he said, there was a hole. Not a cave, not a well, not a mine shaft, a hole. Perfectly round, roughly 9 feet 9 inches across, its rim ringed by ancient bricks that someone had laid by hand and stacked just slightly above the level of the ground. Nobody knew who had built that brick ring. Nobody knew how old it was. It simply predated everyone's memory, and it had always been there. Locals, Mel claimed, had known about the hole for generations, and for generations, they had used it as the world's most convenient garbage dump. Dead cattle, broken refrigerators, old tires, bags of trash, anything a rural family wanted to be rid of, all of it went into the hole. But here's the first detail that makes you sit up a little straighter. No matter how much anyone threw down into that pit, it never filled up, not even close. Decades of garbage vanished into it, and the level never rose an inch. And in all those years, not one single person ever reported hearing any of it hit the bottom. Because there was no echo. You could drop a heavy object straight down, lean over the brick rim, and listen, and you would hear nothing. No thud, no splash, no clatter of impact. Just silence swallowing whatever you gave it. Radios brought near the rim behaved strangely, losing their signal or picking up faint, garbled broadcasts that had no business being out there in the wilderness. Dogs and livestock refused to go near it, planting their feet and pulling back from the edge as if some instinct older than reason was screaming at them to stay away. And strangest of all, there was no cool, damp air rising from the shaft the way there should be from any deep opening into the earth. When people aimed a powerful beam of light straight down into it, the light didn't reflect off anything. It simply vanished, as though the darkness were drinking it. And then there was the depth, the impossible, unforgettable depth. Mel and others decided to actually measure how far down the hole went, using the most basic tool imaginable, fishing line and a weight. They tied on a heavy sinker, fed it over the rim, and let it fall. And it kept falling. So they added more line, and it kept falling. They spliced reel after reel together, adding heavier and heavier weights to keep the line taut and moving, and hour after hour the weight kept sinking without ever going slack, without ever signaling that it had finally reached solid ground. By the time Mel says they stopped, they had fed more than 80,000 feet of line down into the hole. Let that number settle for a moment. 80,000 feet is over 15 miles. It is more than twice the depth of the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in any ocean on Earth. It is nearly double the depth of the Kola Superdeep borehole, the deepest hole that human beings, with billion-dollar drilling technology, have ever managed to bore into the planet. And Mel Waters was claiming that a hole in a Washington field measured with nothing more than fishing tackle went deeper than all of it, and still didn't end. If that were the whole story, it would already be one of the strangest things ever reported. But an endless hole, as impossible as that already sounds, was only the beginning, because the things that came out of Mel's hole are so much worse. Take what happened with the ice. At some point, someone had the idea to lower a sealed container of ordinary ice deep down into the pit, leave it there for a while, and then winch it back up to see what the hole would do to it. Now, common sense tells you exactly what should happen. Ice sent down into the earth, where temperatures rise the deeper you go, should come back as water, melted, warm, and unremarkable. That's not what came back. When they retrieved the container, the ice had not melted at all, but it was no longer ice. It had transformed into a strange, dry, white, salt-like crystalline substance that nobody could identify. And when they tried to test it, it got worse. The material wouldn't melt. It wouldn't dissolve properly. According to the accounts, you could hold an open flame directly to it, a blowtorch, and it would not burn, would not ignite, would not behave like any known compound on the periodic table. Frozen water went down into that hole, and an unknown mineral came back up. How does that happen? Nobody could say. And yet, as bizarre as that is, the ice is not the story that made people stop calling Mel's hole a curiosity and start calling it something evil. For that, we have to talk about the dog. One of Mel's neighbors, the story goes, had a beloved dog that died, and rather than bury the animal, he did what everyone in the area had always done with things they wanted gone. He took the body to the hole and dropped it in, letting the bottomless pit carry his dead pet down into wherever all the garbage went. A sad but ordinary end. Except it wasn't the end. Sometime later days, by most tellings, that same man was out in the woods and he saw his dog, his dead dog, alive. Running through the trees, wearing the very same collar it had been wearing when it died, moving through the forest as if nothing had ever happened to it. But when the man called out to it, called it by name, the way he had 1,000 times before, the animal stopped, turned, and looked at him, and then ran. It would not come to him. It would not let him near, as though whatever had come back up out of that hole wearing his dog's body was no longer really his dog at all. A dead animal, thrown into a bottomless pit, walking the earth again. Now, if you're a skeptic, and after a claim like that, I honestly don't blame you, you're probably already reaching for the obvious explanation. Maybe it was a different dog. Maybe the animal was never really dead. Hold on to that thought, because you're going to need it. But also brace yourself, because the fourth and final discovery is the one that doesn't just bend the rules of biology. It shatters everything we think we know about life and death. To really test the hole, someone decided to lower a living animal into it. A sheep, alive and healthy, was secured and slowly lowered deep down into the shaft, held there, and then winched carefully back up to the surface. And when it came back into the light, The sheep was dead, but it hadn't simply died. It had been cooked. Cooked from the inside out, its internal organs seared as if by tremendous heat, while the outside of the animal, the wool, the skin, remained strangely untouched, the exact reverse of what fire does. Fire burns you from the outside in. Whatever was down in that hole had done the opposite. And then they cut the animal open, and inside its body cavity, they found something that was still alive. It was small, hairless, smooth-skinned and pale, shaped, the witnesses said, something like a seal but with no fur at all. And when they looked closer, they realized the most horrifying detail of all: its eyes. The creature had eyes that were unmistakably, disturbingly human. It looked up at the men who had opened the sheep, and it looked at them the way a person looks at another person. Now here is where the entire story turns on its head, and here is the detail that has kept people obsessing over Mel's hole for decades. Mel Waters, according to the legend, had cancer. He was a sick man. But after his encounter with the thing that came out of that sheep, this hairless, human-eyed creature, pulled alive from the belly of a cooked animal that had been lowered into a bottomless pit, Mel's cancer was gone. Cured. Completely. The impossible thing that crawled out of the darkness didn't just kill, it healed. So, let's take stock of where we are. An endless pit that swallows 15 miles of line and never ends. Ice that goes down as water and comes back as an unknown mineral that cannot burn. A dead dog that walks out of the woods alive but changed. And a living, human-eyed creature that emerges from a bottomless hole and cures a dying man of cancer. 4 impossibilities, all tied to one hole, in one field, on one lonely ridge in Washington state. So what on earth, or what beyond it, could possibly explain any of this? As it turns out, there are 2 competing theories that people have put forward over the years. And while neither one fully closes the case, I promise you that each is stranger and more unsettling than the last. The first theory says something that, on its face, sounds almost comforting compared to human-eyed creatures and resurrected dogs. It says that Mel's hole is not supernatural at all. It says that Mel's hole is real, that its properties are real, and that it is the single most classified secret the United States government has ever tried to bury literally. And to understand why people believe that, you have to understand what happened to Mel Waters after he went on the radio. Because the moment Mel told his story to millions of listeners on Coast to Coast AM, his life, by his own account, began to fall apart, in a very specific and very sinister way. Mel claimed that after the broadcast, he was visited. Men came to see him, the kind of anonymous, official men that show up again and again in stories like this one. He claimed he was detained. He claimed he was questioned, sedated, and made to lose track of time, waking up disoriented with hours or days missing from his memory. And then, most tellingly of all, he claimed that he was paid. Paid an enormous, life-changing sum of money, enough, he said, that he could leave the country and relocate to Australia in exchange for his silence, and for handing over the property with the hole on it. And then Mel Waters vanished. He surfaced a handful of times over the following years, phoning back into Art Bell's show with new fragments of the story, each call a little more paranoid than the last. And then he was simply gone. To this very day, no one has ever been able to independently verify that Mel Waters existed at all. There is no clear property record, no paper trail, no confirmed identity, nothing solid to grab onto. To skeptics, that absence is proof the whole thing was invented. But to believers, that absence is proof of something far darker, that a man went on national radio, described a hole the government did not want described, and was quietly and completely erased. So why would any government care about a hole in a field? The theory has an answer, and it's a chillingly practical one. Think about what a truly bottomless pit would actually be worth to the people who manage a nation's most dangerous secrets. A hole that never fills up. A hole that swallows everything and gives back silence. It would be the perfect place, arguably the only perfect place, to dispose of the most hazardous material humanity has ever created: nuclear waste, classified hardware, things that can never be allowed to resurface. You could pour the worst of the atomic age into a shaft like that forever, and it would never come back to haunt you. A government that discovered such a place wouldn't study it and publish papers about it. A government that discovered such a place would fence it off, deny it existed, and use it. And there's a real-world backdrop that makes this uncomfortably plausible. This part of Washington state is not empty wilderness in the way you might imagine. There is significant government and military land in the region, including vast tracts used as firing ranges and restricted zones. Land in America gets seized, restricted, and quietly folded into classified use more often than people like to think. And multiple curious researchers who later went looking for Mel's hole reported the same frustrating thing: gated access roads, fencing, and a distinct sense that certain areas out on that ridge were simply not places you were allowed to go anymore. Then there's the detail that even the government theory can't quite tame that ring of ancient, hand-laid brick around the rim. Someone built that. Someone, at some point lost to history, dug or found a perfectly round 9'9" shaft and carefully lined its mouth with masonry. If the hole is natural, why is it capped with the work of human hands? And if it's man-made, then who had the knowledge, the reason, and the technology to build something like it, long before anyone in the modern era ever arrived to throw their garbage in? Even if you don't buy the Men in Black secret payoff version of events, and plenty of level-headed people don't, you have to admit the shape of the story is deeply strange. A man goes on the biggest paranormal show in the country, describes in detail a hole with impossible properties on land he owns, and then both the man and the hole simply cease to exist, leaving behind fences, denials, and a trail that goes cold the instant you try to follow it. That's the government theory, but it leaves one enormous thing unexplained. Because a black budget and a bottomless waste pit might account for the secrecy, but they cannot account for the dog, or the creature, or the cure. And that's exactly where the second theory comes in. The second theory throws out the idea of government cover-ups entirely. It says that no black project, no matter how advanced, could ever produce what witnesses described at Mel's hole, because the hole is not a hole at all. It is a doorway, a portal, a tear in the fabric of reality itself, opening onto somewhere that is emphatically not our world. And when you line up the details, you have to admit, this theory accounts for the very things the government version can't touch. A secret waste shaft doesn't resurrect the dead. A classified dumping ground doesn't grow an unknown healing creature inside a living sheep. Those aren't the fingerprints of engineering. Those are the fingerprints of something reaching through. The people who hold this view point first to the oldest layer of the story, the layer that existed long before Mel Waters ever picked up a telephone. Because the local tradition, the folklore of the region, is said to have marked this place as forbidden for a very long time. In tellings of the legend, the indigenous peoples of the area regarded the site with dread, treating it as a place connected to death, a mouth into the underworld, somewhere the living were never meant to go. And that instinct isn't unique to one place. The idea of a bottomless pit as a gateway to another realm shows up across human mythology all over the planet: the abyss, the underworld, the mouth of the world of the dead, the wells and caves that lead down into somewhere other. And in nearly every one of those traditions, there is a recurring rule. What goes down into such a place, if it comes back at all, comes back changed. Doesn't that sound familiar? A dead dog goes into the pit and comes back alive, but wrong, distant, no longer willing to come to the man who loved it. That is not a biology story. That is the oldest kind of ghost story humans have, the one about the loved one who returns from the other side and is never quite themselves again. The details of Mel's hole don't read like a science report. They read like folklore that walked into the modern world and started answering the phone. And the creature, the hairless, human-eyed thing pulled from the cooked sheep, fits this theory with terrible precision. To those who believe the hole is a portal, that creature isn't an animal at all. It's a being from the other side, something that lives at the boundary, in the place the shaft opens onto, and that operates entirely outside the biological rules that govern our world. That's how it can heal a fatal illness with a touch. It simply isn't bound by the laws that make cancer fatal for the rest of us. And the sheep, cooked from the inside out while its wool stayed cold to the touch, that inversion of natural law, heat radiating outward from within instead of burning inward from without, is exactly the kind of impossible backwards physics you would expect at a seam, where two realities grind against each other. Then there are the whispers on the radio. Remember those garbled broadcasts, the signals that bled into people's receivers near the rim, voices and fragments with no source out there in the empty country. If Mel's Hole were a portal, it wouldn't just move physical matter between worlds. It would move information, sound, signal, maybe even echoes carried across time. Believers point to this as evidence that the hole isn't a location so much as a wound in the ordinary flow of cause and effect. And here's the detail that took this theory from a single strange field to something much bigger. Mel Waters, in his later calls, claimed that his hole in Washington was not the only one. He said he had found a second, identical pit, this one out in Nevada, with the very same impossible depth and the very same unsettling properties. And around it, he described time behaving strangely, distortions, encounters that made no sense. If that's true, then Mel's Hole was never a one-in-a-billion freak of geology. It was a node, one opening in a network of them, doorways scattered across the map, all leading down into the same somewhere else. Try as you might to laugh it all off, and I understand the urge. The portal theory has one undeniable strength. It is the only explanation on the table that accounts for the healing, the resurrection, and the transformation all at once. It doesn't leave the creature or the dog as loose threads. It ties the whole terrible package together with a single idea, that Mel dug his garbage into the entrance of another world. And it is precisely because that idea is so unbearable that so many people are so desperate to find a normal, boring, comforting explanation instead. So, let's be fair. Let's give the skeptics their turn, and let's see how much of Mel's Hole survives when we actually press on it. Here is the part of the story that the true believers would rather you skipped, because when you examine Mel's Hole with a cold and careful eye, a great deal of it falls apart in your hands almost immediately. Let's start with the most important point of all. There is no verified physical evidence that Mel's Hole ever existed. None. Over the years, curious investigators, journalists, and geology-minded researchers have gone out to Kittitas County looking for this legendary bottomless pit, and they have come back with nothing. No giant brick-lined shaft, no 15-mile abyss, no ring of ancient masonry sitting out in a field. For something that supposedly swallowed decades of a whole community's garbage, it has left behind a remarkably complete absence of proof. And the geology is stubbornly uncooperative. The rock formations and water table of that region simply do not support the existence of a dry, open shaft plunging tens of thousands of feet into the earth. Deep holes flood, deep holes collapse. They do not politely remain open for generations so that ranchers can toss refrigerators into them. Then there's the man himself. Mel Waters could never be confirmed as a real, identifiable person. No solid records, no verifiable property ownership, nothing that would let an outside investigator pin the name to an actual human being. Now, believers hear that and cry cover-up. But there's a far simpler reading. One anyone who has spent time around late-night talk radio will recognize instantly. An unverifiable name attached to an unverifiable story is exactly what you'd expect from a caller spinning a tale for a paranormal show. The physics of the headline claim buckles too. Consider that 80,000 feet of fishing line, 15 miles of monofilament, has real, substantial weight when it's hanging straight down in a column. Long before you ever paid out that much line, it would snap under the strain of its own weight and the friction along its length. The whole measurement, described with ordinary reels and sinkers, isn't realistically achievable. The single most famous detail of the entire legend, the endless depth itself, doesn't survive first contact with a physics textbook. And the rest of it, the ice that becomes an unburnable salt, the sheep cooked from within, the human-eyed creature, the resurrected dog, the cured cancer, every last one of these claims shares the same fatal weakness. There is nothing to examine. No sample of the mysterious mineral was ever produced for a laboratory. No body of the creature. No photograph of the animal, no dog, no witness who could be independently tracked down and questioned under scrutiny. In the language of investigation, a spectacular claim supported by zero physical evidence and a single anonymous source is not a mystery. It is the textbook profile of an urban legend, and a fairly clean example of one at that. It also helps to remember exactly where this story was born. Coast to Coast AM was, first and foremost, entertainment brilliant, atmospheric, late-night entertainment. built on callers phoning in with astonishing tales in the small hours of the morning. Mel's Hole became one of the most beloved stories in the show's entire history, and it became beloved for a very specific reason. It is a perfect campfire story. It's simple to follow, it escalates beautifully from one impossibility to the next, and it is designed so that it can never be checked. That's not an accident. That's craftsmanship. So there it is, laid out honestly. The skeptics have a strong hand, maybe a winning one, and if that were the whole picture, we could all switch off the lights and sleep soundly tonight. But, and with a story like this, there is always a but. There are a few things that even the skeptics have never been able to fully put to rest. Because here's what nags at you, even after you've heard every reasonable debunking. Why did this story spread so far and last so long if it was really just one man on the phone for a couple of hours? Genuine one-off hoaxes tend to burn bright and vanish. Mel's Hole has haunted people for decades. Why do multiple locals, people with no obvious connection to Mel Waters, reportedly insist that there really was a hole out on that ridge, a pit their families had used and known about for as far back as anyone could remember? Why did so many people who went looking come back describing fences, gates, and restricted ground where an ordinary empty field should be? And why, in all these years, has no one, not Mel, not the government, not any determined investigator, ever been permitted to walk the public right up to the spot and prove, once and for all, that there is simply nothing there? For the believers, the very absence of the hole has become the most suspicious thing of all. And this is where we come back, at last, to the camera. Because according to the account that lies at the dark heart of this whole legend, before the land was fenced and sealed and lost, one final attempt was made not to measure the hole this time, but to see it. To see the bottom, or, failing that, to see whatever it was that lived down there in the black. A powerful light and a camera were rigged together and bolted to a heavy steel weight. The whole assembly was fixed to a winch cable, and a group of men gathered around a monitor at the surface as the line began to feed out, foot by foot, lowering their one electronic eye down into the throat of Mel's Hole. For the first few thousand feet, there was nothing to see but the shaft itself. The ancient brick of the rim gave way to raw, dark stone. The camera sank past it steadily, the men at the top watching the walls scroll by on their screen. And then the walls stopped scrolling because the walls fell away. The narrow shaft opened, all at once, into a void so vast that the camera's light could no longer find the sides of it. They were no longer looking down a hole. They were looking into an open, endless, impossible space beneath the surface of the Earth. The temperature reading was the first thing that broke. Everyone knows that the deeper you descend into the planet, the hotter it should get. But the numbers coming back up the cable weren't rising. They were falling, dropping, steadily, the further down the camera went, as though it were descending not toward the molten heart of the world, but toward somewhere impossibly, unnaturally cold. Then the light itself seemed to fail, not because the bulb died, but because there was suddenly nothing at all for it to land on, nothing to reflect it back, just an infinite blackness that drank every lumen the way the hole had always drunk everything given to it. And then, in the last handful of frames before the men lost the feed, something moved. It rose toward the camera, not falling past it, rising up out of the depths to meet it. A pale, smooth, hairless shape climbing up through the dark toward the light, and as it came, it turned its face to the lens. And there, filling the monitor in the seconds before the screen went to static, were two eyes reflecting the camera's light straight back, wide and wet and wrong, staring into the lens with the unmistakable, unbearable awareness of a human being, the same human eyes. The feed cut. The monitor went to snow, and up at the surface, the winch cable miles of steel that had been paying out steadily for what felt like forever suddenly went slack. When the men hauled it up, hand over hand, faster and faster in a rising panic, they found the end of the line severed clean through, as neatly as if it had been cut with a blade. The camera was gone. The light was gone. Whatever had risen out of the dark to take them was never seen again. That is what they saw. That is the footage that terrified everyone who ever heard of it, the reason no one who was there would ever go back to the rim. And depending entirely on who you choose to believe, The reason a meaningless field in the middle of rural Washington was quietly fenced off, its access roads gated, and a hole that should not exist made to disappear from every map that mattered. As for Mel Waters, the man who started it all, he was never reliably heard from again. He surfaces sometimes in the memory of the story, a voice on old radio tapes in the middle of the night, and then he's gone. The way everything connected to that hole seems to eventually be gone. The land, according to the last people who went looking, is off limits. The brick ring, if it was ever really there, is buried or hidden, or was never there to begin with. And so, whatever is truly at the bottom of Mel's hole, a government secret too dangerous to name, a doorway to a world that was never meant to touch ours, or simply the most perfect story ever whispered into a late-night microphone, the one group of people who might have finally looked it in the eye, pulled up a severed, empty cable, and never spoke of it again. I guess we'll never know.